The course topics of today, lesson 1 will be regulatory requirements. Lesson 2, benefits of the workplace inspection. Lesson 3, different types of inspections. Lesson 4, safety inspection program. And lesson 5, OC requirements. And just as a reminder, this presentation was sent out, emailed earlier today. There was a request that to have it sent out earlier. I am going to do my best to have the presentations made up earlier than just the day before the webinar, but this allows you to make notes if you put it in the print mode that allows you to view 3 slides at a time. You can make your own notes. So there is a copy of this, and we can make our own notes on it. So back to the webinar here, lesson 1, regulatory requirements. Again, we are looking at the Workers' Compensation Act and the Occupational Health and Safety Regulations. These are the 2 main bodies that everything that we do refers to on the regulatory. So for the workplace inspections required by the Workers' Compensation Act, Part 3, if we wanted to go there and find out, it is Part 3, Division 4 section. It deals with the Joint Health and Safety Committee, specifically Section 130 H and I. What that entails is, and these are some of the new requirements that have been put out, and there is a push from WorkSafe BC to make sure that companies do have an effective Joint Health and Safety Committee or worker representative. Again, if we're under 19 people, employees, you don't have to have a Joint Health and Safety Committee. You can have just a worker representative, but anything that applies to the Joint Health and Safety Committee also applies to your worker representative. So here's one of the ones here that WorkSafe has changed to ensure that inspections are carried out, to make sure that Joint Health and Safety Committee members or your worker representatives participate in inspections. That's a big one that it was suggested in the past. Now they're making it mandatory that your worker representative or your Joint Health and Safety Committee members need to participate in the workplace inspections. They also need to be involved in the investigation program when that happens, and we'll talk about that when we cover that topic. Lastly here, Part 3, Division 11, inspections by WorkSafe BC. So again, these are regulatory requirements under the Workers' Compensation Act. So the whole point of this is to prove that we're not just doing best practice, that there are regulatory requirements. The regulatory requirements by the Occupational Health and Safety Regulations are found under Part 3, Rights and Responsibilities. There's a section in there that deals with workplace inspections. Part 4, General Conditions. Part 8, Personal Protective Clothing and Equipment. Part 9, Confined Spaces. Part 11, Fall Protection. Part 12, Machinery and Equipment. Part 13, ladders, scaffold, and temporary work platforms such as scissor lifts. Part 14, cranes and hoists. Part 16, mobile equipment. Part 19, electrical safety. And Part 20, construction, evaluation, and demolition. So you can see that there are many different parts of the regulations that there is a requirement to have an element of inspections. We're going to talk about the different types in a little bit, but this is just to show reference that there is a requirement and where they are found. That's our quick little review of the regulatory requirements, again, of the Workers' Compensation Act and the Occupational Health and Safety Regulation. Okay. Lesson 2, the benefits of a workplace inspection. The first one is it identifies the need for training. If we walk around and look and see that someone's not doing something properly, we need to then investigate why they're not doing it. Have they been trained? Were they orientated? Are they supervised? Is there a policy? Is there a procedure? Is there safe work practices? Any of those can apply, or it will highlight where there is a gap. It'll also explain why there are certain types of accidents occur. Usually this happens because of either behavior or equipment. We will see later on that one of the things that we look for when we do inspections is looking for repeat items. Priority for corrective action. We're going to use the hierarchy of control, and we're going to rate our observations of our items found in our workplace inspections, rate them either an A, B, or C. Obviously, we're going to give more attention, and the priority will be given to A or B or higher rating potential risks. It helps establish healthy work methods. So here we're checking to make sure that, you know what, people are actually doing what we want them to do. Again, it'll go back to, is there a policy? Is there a procedure? Is there a safe work practice? Were they trained? Were they supervised? So it repeats itself. It helps identify high-risk areas, equipment, and tasks. We looked at previously we looked at the Joint Health and Safety Committee minutes, and I provided a template there that had all the different departments with the different types of injuries and the different nature of the injuries. What this does is highlights the different departments or sections of your workplace that have a higher risk or have the potential or have the recorded injuries. Or in this case, we're talking about workplace inspections. Maybe there's repeat items coming up again, and we need to figure out why that is happening. It is an important preventative tool. One of the things, if something seriously happens at your work site, one of the things I guarantee you WorkSafe BC is going to ask for at a minimum 6 months, if not a year, of all workplace inspections. It helps reduces incidents and property damage. Again, we're doing inspections, so this could also fall under maintenance of equipment. We're not letting things get so far out of hand that you know, when things break down or they become defective, we don't have the down and out time where instead of doing regular maintenance on it and addressing it quickly before it gets to a state where you can't do anything about it, we save that our time there. And again, 3 most famous words in occupational health and safety is document, document, document. We need to record any kind of hazards. We need to show WorkSafe that we've identified the hazards and we're putting a corrective action in place. It doesn't have to be the textbook answer, but it needs to be something that we can show by due diligence that we are doing something to help mitigate or prevent that injury or incident or whatever potential hazard from either happening or recurring again. And then it's also used to determine adequate controls. So sometimes when we do put in a corrective action, we need to do an inspection afterwards to follow up on that to make sure that the corrective actions were the right ones. And remember, there was 3 things that you can do. You can do nothing, which means everything's okay. You can do more, or you can do less. So by looking at what controls are in place, it will tell you what you need to do. You either have to do more, or you do nothing and that it's good, or maybe it's a bit of an overkill and you can maybe take back some resources or money spent on things towards that. It's case by case, so I can't quite have an example right there and there for you. And lastly, it's used to reevaluate any corrective actions that I've kind of alluded to in the previous points here. So they're the benefits of the workplace inspection, some of them quickly listed there. So that's our quick review of the benefits. Okay, so for lesson 3, the 5 different types of inspections will include spot inspections, pre-operation inspections, critical parts inspections, new equipment inspections, and routine inspections. So to break them down, spot inspections, this may be a management or a supervisor inspection when they go out on the floor, or we do with smaller companies, a lot of times management or owners will do a walk around and they just want to know where they are on the process of what's being done that day. This would be considered a spot inspection. One of the things to remember, even though we have and do spot inspections, one of the things that we strongly suggest is, especially for the supervisors, is to write down these spot inspections. So when they're going around, write down what you saw. And remember, we're not always looking at the negative or the corrective actions. If people are doing what they're meant to be doing, give them a kudos. Write down that everybody was wearing their PPE. I often get committee members to write down that when they look at forklift operators, to write down that, you know, they observed 1, 2, 3 forklift operators all wearing their seat belts. So write down the positive, not just the negative. Spot inspections are also used to follow up on a corrective action after an incident. So if something was to happen, we obviously put our corrective actions in place. So again, what are we going to do about it when we go back and review it? Are we going to do more? Are we going to do nothing? Or are we going to do less? Maybe we want to do a spot inspection because we've changed the workflow or the work procedure, and we're just checking in, or we've introduced something new. You know, we're trying to see how well that's working out. That would be another reason for a spot inspection. And again, here we have the new worker. We have new workers, although they're orientated, and hopefully they're orientated and under supervision, but at some time, there comes a time where we have to let them work on their own. That being said, spot inspections for new workers. I know in the oil and gas and some construction companies, they give all new workers a green hard hat. So it identifies them as a new worker, and it's not until they finish their 6-month probation or sometimes 1 year that they can remove their green hat and go back to a white hat, white hard hat. And usually the methodology there is that everybody looks out for the new worker. So it's not just the responsibility of the supervisor, but anybody walking around with the green hard hat is to be considered new, and it's everybody's responsibility to make sure that they're in the area or doing what they're meant to be doing. Another different type of inspection is the pre-operations inspections, and this could be a visual check. We're looking for pressures, maybe we're looking for amperage, maybe we're just looking at the piece of equipment or the tools. Could be any of the above. An operational check, especially for a forklift or a crane. There's some tests that you need to run every morning. I know, let's pick on the crane this time. You need to run it up, we need to run it down, you need to move it left side, right side. You got to make sure that the brakes come into play when you stop. And then, as I said, for forklift, cranes, and hoist, mobile equipment, etc., these are all examples of pre-operation inspections, and these should all be documented. If you're looking for forms, send me an email, but you can quickly go on to WorkSafe BC site, and they'll have some of these daily inspection forms, and a quick Google search for forklift inspections or crane and hoists will give you a variety of different layouts and examples of daily inspection forms for cranes and hoists and forklifts, etc. The next section is critical parts inspections. So this is any part that has a high potential for a serious accident. So maybe this is part of a tool or part of a piece of equipment that we need to inspect. And you know what, it all depends on what you have. I have had companies that do critical part inspections at the beginning of each use. It could be on an hourly basis, it could be on a half hour, it could be every day. It all depends on what it is. You guys will know your company's best and would know what you would want people to look at and record, that you know maybe something's at the right temperature, at the right amperage, at the right thickness for whatever your company produces. New equipment inspections. We need to look at specific tests and checks before startup. One of my companies, they were they were making their own equipment. The downside of making your own equipment is you have to have it engineered. And even though they had it engineered out, it was missed that they had the wrong rated hydraulic lines. And it wasn't until someone did a pre-check before they fired it up to realize that the hoses were rated at a lesser PSI, which means if they had put that press under full strain, it would easily have ruptured the hoses and potentially caused a serious accident. Just an example there. All parts need to be in the right place and working order. So a lot of times, pieces of equipment or tools come from the manufacturer and they're missing parts, or maybe there's some assembly required. We need to make sure that everything's in place. Normally, we also put something like this under our pre-operation check in our standard operating procedures. That would be one of the areas that we can double up to make sure, you know, everything's in place where it should be before we fire up the tool or equipment. And then we have our routine inspections, and this one's very generic because, you know, regular, what does that mean, right? Could be carried out on a regular basis in a given working area. So regular is in quotations because it is based on the case-by-case scenario, because not all hazards are created equally. Therefore, not everything needs to have the same frequency of inspections. Lesson 4, Safety Inspection Program. For the Safety Inspection Program, we are going to look at the purpose of inspections, how to plan an inspection, how to conduct an inspection, how to handle inspection results, how to review inspection systems, and follow up. So, for the purpose of inspections, you need to compare current conditions with the standard. So, again, we need to look at what the regulations, the Workers' Compensation Act and the OHSR has for regulations, and are we in compliance or with that? Standards could be, maybe it's not in the regulations. We really haven't talked about this, but the next step after the regulations is the guidelines. After the guidelines then becomes the standards. So this could be a CSA standard, it could be in the States an ANSI standard, it could be any other agency that has a standard. If it will trump WorkSafe BC's regulations, because you know, there's no point in WorkSafe BC writing up standards if CSA has already done it. It's a good example. There's a variety of others like NFPA, BC Building Code would be standards as well, right? So the purpose of inspections also determines if a gap exists. As mentioned earlier, when we're walking around, you know, maybe there's an assumption that everybody knows what they're meant to be doing. Maybe there's an assumption that a product is being done or delivered and wasn't delivered. It helps identify causes for gaps, which we talked about. It helps develop recommendations for corrective actions. When we use a form, which we'll get to in a minute, we've identified a hazard. If we follow the process, we rate it A, B, or C, then we're going to put a corrective measure in using our hierarchy of control. And we're going to document this, and then that way we're using the proper methodology for trying to mitigate the hazard. How to plan an inspection? We need to set out a work schedule with the employer. Usually inspections are done prior to the Joint Health and Safety Committee meeting, usually a week earlier. For a health and safety representative with a small company, I would still advise doing it a week earlier prior to your meeting, because it allows you time to get some things done. We still want it documented, that it was recorded that you found something that needed change. And even if you could do it right then and there, like a good example is you're walking around doing your workplace inspection and the fire exits are blocked, and it's just because the way that the day's going, someone needed the room, they blocked the door or put things in the way. We can easily move that as we're doing our inspection. We don't have to wait until we have our meeting with management then to write down a corrective action of who's assigned to do it. There are scenarios such as this where we can mitigate it right away. Same thing being said, if we identify something that's a high-risk hazard, we can do something about it right away. We are not going to wait till we have a meeting a week later or 2 weeks later to talk to management about it. We need to deal with it right away once it's been identified. We also need to plan how often an item must be inspected. So again, we're looking at the frequency. We need to determine, you know, an overall plant workplace inspection. The regulation says we need to do it monthly, but there may be certain things. For instance, donning fall protection prior to use. Same thing goes for mobile equipment that we talked about. You need to do a forklift inspection daily prior to use. need to develop a checklist of what to review. There's advantages and disadvantages of checklists. The advantage of a checklist is it helps people check off and look for certain identified items. What it doesn't do is identify tasks, behaviors outside of what is written down. So the downside is you only check off what's on the checklist, and it gets very routine at times, and it doesn't look at giving kudos, enforcing positive behavior, or identifying other things that are not on a workplace inspection checklist. That's why we try and get training to everybody so that they can identify this. I do have a checklist. I have an example that I will show you in a little bit of one that I developed recently for a company, and it'll show you some of the items that we need to look at. Another thing when planning an inspection is who and how to notify the employees of inspection results. One of the things we need to do is we need to notify management of certain items right away if there's the importance there. Otherwise, our workplace inspections need to be posted on our health and safety board. What I like to do is, and I advise companies to do, is buy that wooden clipboard that's got the long metal curved, I don't know, there's two metal pieces there that if you punch 2 holes in it, you can accumulate quite a few. You know, if they can accumulate the year, that's perfect, because then if anybody wants to know what's going on, or if WorkSafe comes in, or for the audit, you can easily produce, you know, that year's monthly inspections. Here's an example of a checklist that I created. So some of the stuff on the left here, I'll just read a few. Like, is the emergency lighting in place and tested on a regular basis? Is there a posted evacuation plan for the shop? Are extinguishers located conspicuously marked? Are fire extinguishers fully charged and operational? These are just some things there. If you skip down to the next section, it's asking a few questions about guards, machine guarding, right? Are the guards secured to the equipment? Are guards on hand-operated tools in place? Are tools being operated to the procedures? Next one here on the far side here, the second row, we're looking at breaker panels. Are they accessible? We're looking at electrical cords, extension cords. Then there's a section here on cranes for this company. Another section, they have cylinders, they're doing welding. So are the cylinders chained and secured? Is the valve cap in place when not in use? Are fully and empty gas cylinders stored separately? So that's an example of that. And then you can get into, on the back side of that page, we talked about the WMIS. We're looking at, is the spill kit available? Is the SDS, and the SDS is what we used to call the MSDS, right? The safety data sheets, the material safety data sheets. They're now referred to as the SDS. I got something here on forklifts because this company that I developed before had a lot of forklifts. So, you know, they're the second one, forklifts, 3 daily inspections up to date. So they would go around and they check to make sure that all 3 were done. If all 3 were done, they would get the check mark. If 2 out of 3 were done, they would not get the check mark at that time. Then I have, here we have a lunchroom, first aid room, storage rack, and an office. You guys all have copies of that in front of you, so I'm not going to read each one. But we can customize something, and you should customize one that's specific to your facility. And you can always add other things to be put on top of this and added to this list. There's no set way. This is the basic requirements. Feel free to copy and paste and use it for your own, but also customize it. There may be specific things that you want to make sure that are looked at and inspected at a minimum monthly basis. So how to handle workplace inspection results? Well, we need to discuss what's found. So this is either done in our Joint Health and Safety Committee meeting, or when the health and safety representative meets with management, or if they're the same person in a small company, well, we still need to write it down because there needs to be a discussion about it. And if that health and safety person is senior management at your facility, then you know what, let's talk to the operators to find out what their thoughts are of a solution to an issue that surrounds either the tools, the equipment, or the area that they work in. We need to develop recommendations and write them down. We need to look at the hierarchy of control, look at what control measures can be put in place, and what the corrective actions are. Maybe it's changing out the LED or the phosphorescent lighting to LED lights, or who knows what it is. But we need to write down recommendations. If this isn't the same person, then we need to notify managers, supervisors if immediate action is required. We've talked about that. It needs to be done right away if we see something that has the potential there. Our effective recommendations, there's two ways of looking at it. We have short-term solutions and long-term solutions. The short-term solution solves the immediate cause of the problem, whereas the long-term solution removes the root cause. We're going to talk more about exactly what a root cause is when we do incident investigations, but it's basically the short term is Band-Aid, the long term is long term. We don't need the Band-Aid anymore, and it's not the short term fix. Correct unsafe acts or conditions. So we need to look at what was identified, what was observed, write that down. Example, our forklift operators were all wearing their seatbelts at the time. What was the hazard rating? Again, rated A, B, or C. Is it a repeat item? Is this something that's coming up on a regular basis? Whom and when is it to be corrected by? A lot of times, workplace inspections or corrective actions for companies that are just building the system, they write down what the issue is, but they don't write down the rating, who needs to be involved, what the recommendations are, what the action items are, what the date it is required to be done. That's often missed. I'll show you a form here in a minute, but we need to write down when we need to have a target date, because if we don't have a target date, everything gets pushed out. What action is to be taken, we just discussed that. And at the end of the day, who's going to sign off to make sure it's done? Most times, ideally, we want management to sign off on this. We want their signature on the workplace inspection form anyways to make sure that they are aware of what items were found during the observation. So now we're going to look at substandard acts or practices. Again, we're going to get into this when we do incident investigation, but I'm going to bring up a bunch of different substandard acts or practices here. I'll quickly go through them. You have them in front of you, but these are some of the things that we look for when we're looking for, again, this would be outside of our checklist. So now we're looking at acts or practices. And the way to think the difference here, because there's substandard acts or practices, is this is what the individual is doing, right? So operating equipment without authority, failure to warn, failure to secure, operating at improper speed, making safety devices inoperable, using defective equipment, using equipment improperly, failure to use PPE, improper loading, improper placement, improper position of task, improper lifting, servicing equipment in operation, horseplay, under the influence of drugs or alcohol, failure to follow procedures, policies, practice, failure to identify the hazards, the risks, failure to check and monitor, failure to correct or react, failure to communicate or coordinate. Again, the substandard acts or practices are with the individual, right? Whereas the substandard condition basically applies to the workplace. So when we're looking at the workplace, was there inadequate guards or barriers? Was there inadequate or improper protective equipment? Was there defective tools, equipment, material, congested or restrictive action? Inadequate warning systems, fire and explosion hazards, poor housekeeping, disorder, hazardous environment conditions, whether it's gases, fumes, vapors, dust, smoke, noise exposure, maybe there's a radiation exposure, maybe there's temperature exposures or extremes, inadequate or excess illumination, lighting, too much lighting, too little lighting, inadequate ventilation, inadequate instructions or procedures. So again, this is the business, this is the company, the substandard acts and practices are on the individual, the substandard conditions are of the business. And what this is meant to do is we'll see it when we do the incident investigations. These are areas that we look for. It'll become more apparent when we do the incident investigations, but this does identify, I would say, the majority of substandard acts and practices or the substandard conditions that can be found on a workplace inspection. So here's an example of a form. You guys should have a copy of this, and you're free to use any workplace inspection form you want. This one was created to show the different areas of where the inspections are. With bigger companies, they do this per department, per plant, per facility. That's why it's got a different department areas covered. Time of inspection, the date of inspection, very important that we have dates in case something happens. Copies too. So who this gets sent to in small companies, it doesn't have to be emailed to senior management and middle management and the supervisors and then posted on the board. In a smaller company, maybe just on the board and 1 or 2 people know about it, but still to have a documented copy sent to you. What else do we have here? Who it was inspected by, who the worker representative was, and who management supervisor was. Who, because most times we want more than one person to do this inspection. That being said, with smaller companies, that may prove to be a difficulty if you're, if you're a micro employer or even a small employer and you're under 19 people. To have 2 people go around, I'm not sure if it's feasible time-wise or the lost man hours there, but regardless, someone needs to do it. Ideally, we want more than one person. So when you look at this, we have item numbers and locations. What I suggest you do there is you put in the year and then start 01, 02, or 03, and then at the new year, you put in a new year. If you run a numbering system continuously, I've been to companies where they're at, item number 10,001 because they've done it for 20 years. It just gets really, you don't need to go there. You need to, the next column there, you identify what the hazards or the issues are, give it a rating, A, B, or C. Is it a repeat item, yes or no? Because at the end of the year, as we're going through this, we need to start reviewing our workplace inspections of what's being found. We're going to review it for the quality, the content, and we should be highlighting whether it's a repeat item. Then the next, here for the follow-up section, you can see there's a little, let's call it a tab midway there. Who is it going to be corrected by, and then a date. What needs to be done, when the completion date is, what the desired completion date is, and then who signed off on it, who's given it the final okay. This is a good example of a form. It meets all the requirements needed. It's a very simple form, so I strongly suggest that you use a form like this. Feel free to customize your own, but have these different sections in it. So here I wanted to show a bunch of pictures that I've recently come across. So here we're looking at racking, and this is one of the big new standards that are coming forward, and this is something that we can easily find on a workplace inspections here. Obviously, a forklift or something has dinged this because they've lifted it up and they've bent the main horizontal piece there. The second picture here, now we can see that it's obviously been hit quite a few times and we're trying to just screw it together. I don't know if you've ever Googled the pictures of racking failures, but when this stuff goes, it pulls down the whole row. It's usually just not one section that goes out, and it all depends on what's on top of this racking, because a lot of times we don't always put the lightest stuff at the bottom, so the heavier stuff is up top, and having that all come down in one go could be very hazardous to anybody working in that area, yet alone the potentials when we start storing chemicals like that. We also need to observe that we need to watch what chemicals we're storing beside each other. Here's another example of this racking's been dinged more than once. They've even put up a guard on the one side there, the yellow, to prevent it, but that would fail in inspection. And with the new codes coming up here that are effective very quickly here, that would fail. This would get you a written order by WorkSafe BC. Here we have, obviously, no labels. We've got multicolored spray bottles here with different fluids. Then we've got storage beside it there. It's just poor housekeeping here. Plus, you know what? I don't know what's in the white 5-gallon pails. Can they sit next to the black pails, which is beside the blue pail? Who knows about the off-gassing and what have you. So here we have the next one. We have a table saw, a compound miter saw, and one we're cutting, and you can see the dust on the piece of wood, and they've obviously cleaned this up prior to the picture, but the electrical panel's open. And all we need is a little spark with the fine dust to have a little flash, and then we can have the potential of a fire. Why we're cutting and it's throwing the cuttings towards a wall near the panel is beyond me, but what their corrective action was to just move this this cutting table further on down away from the panel. Here I thought for a bit of humor, blade guards must be used when possible, and the guard is on the wall, so that should be on the machine, and it should, you know, it should be the other way around. Guards must be used at all times, and then only removed with special permissions, right? Here we have a dust collection system which isn't going to do anything when it's not connected. We have a simple plug that runs around the wall. The corrective action I know on this one is they put the plug on the other side of that wall, and then just put a cap over the top, a blank plate. Here we have something here with the electrical wire with obviously some shorting out or something here, but we would want to replace that end because it's the fault. I found these two pictures kind of funny because they even put it on the floor at the company. Areas in front of the electrical panels must be clear for 36 inches. So this is a regulation. A lot of times WorkSafe, this is an easy one for them to write companies up on. And the requirement is 36 inches from any electrical panels need to be cleared in front of. Here we have a safety control measure where it's out on the floor attached to a piece of equipment, and yet it reads, do not use loose wiring. That we need to review the what we do with equipment and taking it out of service. Here we have a pallet. We're missing our start. We're missing a few buttons here. Our next one, we have a fire alarm that's buried at the back, so I don't know how you would get to that quickly. Again, here they did some modifications and they didn't move the pull station, so that's in a corner that was buried behind boxes. Behind the yellow ladder, we have a fire extinguisher. That's these are easy ones that WorkSafe looks for as well. That's hidden, and there's another hidden fire extinguisher by the insulation. The next one, we got the ladders blocking the fire extinguisher and the spill kit. We also have the mezzanine level that is being used for storage but has no railings. And I just recently had a company last month written up on this because they were loading. And if you're putting things up high, there needs to be a railing, because if someone's going to stand up there, then there needs to be a railing or a guard in place. Again, we've got the next picture with the tire there. We've got the fire extinguisher, one not labeled, two buried in a corner. We've got a bottle, no labeling on the counter there. Another fire extinguisher that's not mounted, so easily can be kicked over, but it's nice to know that they put the fire extinguisher beside their oil-filled rags, which need to be collected and put in a different location. The next picture there, you see that there's a sign. This time there is a sign for a fire extinguisher, but there is no fire extinguisher. So whether it was removed or missing, it's something that we can easily look for when we're doing our workplace inspections. The next one, we've got a grate missing. So this is a tripping hazard, or potentially a forklift can get a wheel stuck in there and possibly move a load or offset a load and potentially lose the load on the forklift. Here we have a sanding wheel, and that is the manufacturer's switch. I don't know what they were thinking. There's the potential that someone could cut themselves on that, and well, that's self-explanatory, the hazard. The corrective action here is they moved the switch to underneath the cutting table on that one. Here we have a fire exit that's blocked. So if the lights are out and you got to head outside and the power's gone, that's a potential hazard. Our next one here was in a food processing place. They deleted this door, but yet the lighting was still operational. So if they lost their power and if there was an emergency, that would illuminate, yet there's no door, there's no handle, and it's blocked. So you could potentially have people fighting to try and get out there, only to find out that it doesn't go anywhere and there's no handle. Here we have a propane tank storage. You can see that the wall's been dinged a few times, the cage has been dinged, so maybe that's not where we want to store our propane. But this is what they did. They at least moved it. Now we have talking about earlier there that all cylinders need to be contained. There's nothing stopping from these cylinders being knocked over. And I'll give them the benefit of the doubt on this one. I'm not sure if that was the case, whether we've got one stack that is empties and one stack is full. But regardless, we're not meant to be storing our propane tanks like that. Our next one is an individual bending down by this conveyor belt to the left of him. They had a history of items, castings, come up that and hit the individual in the head. Then they put a warning light on, and then he got tired of, not he, this individual, but people working at that, doing this task got tired of the light flashing, so then they blocked the light. So remember when I read that there was making safety devices inoperable? That was a good example, because they blocked the light, they bent down to get it, and then they got dinged in the head again and had to go for stitches. So the fellow, not this one, but a fellow not only had to get stitches, and he also got written up for that. Here we have someone using the very top of a ladder. Remember, the last two steps in the ladder were not meant to be on. There was a wall of ladders that he could have got a more appropriate sized ladder to do the job that he was doing, but he got caught on this one. Here we have someone grinding away. Probably should have a face shield. You can see that they're wearing eye protection, but with that amount of sparks going, you'd want a face shield as well. The next one is a trailer. You can easily buy or manufacture these. So if your loading docks don't line up, because what this did is presented a major tripping hazard because the trailer didn't match up to the dock. And then they eventually had to build some ramps, and they went through wooden ramps and eventually got to metal ramps because nothing always lined up correctly there, and someone just about broke they sprained their ankle, just about broke their leg by stepping off the ramp into the void. It was uneven, and you can just imagine your leg drops, you know, quite a bit, and then the weight of your body will just snap your leg. So that was my quick pictures. We're going to how to review the inspection system. We are going to look at the hazards and the risks. Are they identified correctly? Is there a frequency of inspections? Is it appropriate, right? We talked about this earlier. So when we're reviewing, are the hazards identified correctly? Is it rated properly? Are we looking at the right thing? Is the frequency the same? Are they documented and are they posted? Remember, we want to post our monthly inspections on our Joint Health and Safety Committee board. For the follow-up, we want to make sure that all the items inspected are corrected as required. One of the ways we do this is to make sure that it doesn't come off when we're doing our Joint Health and Safety Committee minutes. There is new business and old business. We want to make sure that we don't have a list of old business. That means we're not doing anything about it. Sometimes, yes, we're waiting on third parties or parts have been ordered, yes, but we need to make sure that we're also removing things off that list of old business. Had someone sign off on the completion? Has management signed off on the report? Again, remember I said on the workplace inspections, if you're having your meeting, whether you're a joint health and safety committee or your safety representative, have management sign off knowing that they know that this was identified. So lesson 5 here, we'll quickly go through the regulatory requirements. We're going to talk about the process, the forms, the hazard prioritization, corrective action, report analysis, communication, training, and hazard reporting. So document 1, we need to have a formal inspection process. So you've got to tell and write down your element, what you do, how you do it. How do you want to break that down into the different sections? Are exactly what we've broken down here. So second section, we need to have forms. So use an inspection form, document it, record it, and have it posted. Have management sign off on it. As we talked about earlier, we need to have the hazard prioritization. We're using the hierarchy of control. Are we using, what control measures are we putting in place? And we're using the risk matrix to decide whether it's an A, B, or a C hazard. Then we need to look at our corrections. This is where we would use our hierarchy of control. What controls can we do? What can we do to mitigate or prevent it from happening? Again, remember, we can do more, we can do nothing, or we can do less. So we need to correct actions implemented for hazard identification. We need to look at the deficiencies and correct them in an appropriate time frame. Again, we want to make sure that things aren't 2 months, 3 months in the making if they don't need to be. We need a report analysis. A minimum of a yearly we need to do and look at what items are repeat items, how effective we are. We could even, some companies like to see how long and track how long it takes something that is entered on the minutes or on a workplace inspection to see how long it takes to be resolved and taken off. Communication, again, we need to be able to communicate to workers. One of the ways outside of a crew talk or a toolbox talk is to have the minutes posted. We are doing our due diligence if we have it posted. If the worker, an employee, does not want to read it, that's up to them. But as a company, we're doing our due diligence if we make the material and information available to them. Other OC requirements are training. Individuals designated to conduct the inspections need to be given some kind of training. And then we need hazard ID reporting. Is there a system to allow workers to report hazardous actions? So again, this would be covered in our orientation. We need to make all workers available and have them know that they can report either to their supervisor, lead hand management, that there is a hazard, and to report it immediately. It's also one of their responsibilities under the Workers' Compensation Act and OH&S regulations is to report incidents and hazardous scenarios. We also need to ensure that action is taken by management in a timely manner. Again, if something was to happen, this is one of the things that WorkSafe is going to look at, is when management knows of something, how long does it take them to deal with it? For effective workplace inspections, we need to make sure we're looking at how critical portion of your health and safety program. Your auditor, the person coming, will be looking for documentation that proves that your workplace is being inspected regularly. Whether it's the auditor or WorkSafe BC, you need to post your workplace inspections. You need to post your Joint Health and Safety Committee minutes. You need to post your incident investigations. You need to post your OH&S regulations, your health and safety policy, any kind of orders, inspections, crew talks. There's a long list of things that does have a legal requirement to post. And again, for audit purposes, we need to have a minimum of 6 months documentation. The reason why that is we need to see, because when the time comes, they're going to look at whether it's effective or not. Just having blank workplace inspection forms doesn't count. We need to show that there is a history of them being done on a regular basis and the basis that is described in your policy and procedure when you develop your element. But at a minimum, For the OC requirement, they are looking for a minimum of 6 months documentation, not just in workplace inspections, but any kind of documentation. So as I said, joint health and safety minute notes, incident investigations, workplace inspections, crew talks, the whole bit. Correct. 6 months is what we need. So that was our review of the OC requirements. We talked about the process, the forms, the hazard identification, or prioritization, sorry, corrective action, report analysis, communication, training, and hazard reporting. Again, if we're developing our element, this is the breakdown for workplace inspections that we would want. Each one of these bullet points here would be a subtitle under that element. So our core summary of today, we looked at the regulatory requirements, we looked at the benefits of workplace inspections, we talked about the 5 different types of workplace inspections, we looked at what a safety inspection program looks like, and we looked at the OC requirements